Welcome to We Sing the Bass Electric, a podcast for bass lovers and music enthusiasts of all genres. Join us as we revisit some of the most iconic recordings from different bassists, past and present, discussing behind-the-scene insight and stories that made up some of the most revered albums of our time, all from a bass player's point of view. Now here's your host, international recording artist, Mr. Christian de Mesones, aka Big New York.
Bob Daisley is a rock and roll bass icon, forever immortalized as the ideal quintessential working man's bassist, with a career that spans over 50 years. Leaving a legacy in the genre of hard rock, blues, and heavy metal, performing and recording in over a dozen projects, Bob has a story to tell, and that he does, in his 2014 autobiography, For Fact's Sake. Please welcome to We Sing the Bass Electric, the Honorable Mr. Bob Daisley. What I admire about your story is how you knew from the beginning of your journey exactly what you wanted out of life and out of music, and also how you became a bass player on the spot. Can you share some of your earliest influences with me and what was going on in your life back in those early high school days?
Yeah, well, I just started learning guitar, just a sort of an acoustic Spanish guitar. I had lessons once a week with a teacher in a class of about, 20, 25 pupils. And this was in 1963. And then one week he had a live band on playing for us. There was a little stage in the hall where we did the lessons, and he put a live band on. They just did a few instrumentals. It was probably, I can't remember exactly what the songs were, but it was probably like surfing music of the day, maybe Shadows or Ventures or Shantays or one of them, And as soon as I saw the electric bass, I'd been playing in the classes for about a year or 15 months, I think it was. And as soon as I saw the electric bass, I thought, that's what I want to do. That's it. I just love the warmth of it, the strength of it, the sensitivity of it as well, So I went home and I told my mum, I said, Mum, I want to give up guitar lessons and I want to pursue bass. And she said, well, if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. So she was very supportive, very understanding. And she said, okay, we'll go into the city and we'll get you a bass. So we went into the city and tried a few different shops that had some used instruments. And I got a used Futurama bass and a little 15-watt amp to practice on. And then I was on my way. And as far as influences in those days, first of all, it would have been, just the surfing music. The Shantays had a song out called Pipeline, which I thought was one of the best surfing songs ever done. But then there were the Shadows and the Ventures and the instrumental bands that were popular at that time. But then along came the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all the British stuff, and I just love the Beatles, but I was also a huge Stones fan. So Bill Wyman, definitely. I love the rhythm section, the feel and the groove and the swing of Charlie Watts and Bill Wyman in the early Rolling Stones, and I saw them a couple of times with the original lineup, and it really did have a huge effect on me. But when I saw the Beatles live, and I was fairly close up to them, that was life-changing. It really was. But from there, I went on to listen very closely to Paul McCartney, and then a bit later with Cream, with Jack Bruce. Also, the Jeff Beck group, the early Jeff Beck group, which was about 1968, somewhere around there, had Ronnie Wood playing bass, and I loved his bass playing. I thought he was really, really good. So they were the main influences, I'd say: Paul McCartney, Jack Bruce, and Ronnie Wood.
You were coming up around the time where you were surrounded by rock's most iconic players, John Paul Jones, Boz Burrell, Phil Lynott.
I mean, he was great for Bad Company. Yeah, it was perfect for Bad Company, because I almost joined Bad Company at that time, but I went away to do a tour. When I came back, it was like a 2 or 3 week tour that I was committed to. And when I came back, they had Boz. So As soon as I heard the band with Boz, I thought, no, they got the right guy. He was perfect for that band. I'd say that it all worked out as it was meant to work out. You know, that band was completed with Boz, and even though I was disappointed in not getting the gig, I knew that he was right for the band.
What was the camaraderie like back then, man, with all of these great musicians that you were kind of surrounded by? I mean, you knew some of these guys personally. I mean, I did read the story that you still have Baza's bass amp, correct?
Yeah, my manager has it now. I gave it to him, but that amp I bought from Boz in 73, 74. I was with Mungo Jerry, and Boz had done the first Bad Company album with it, and it was an acoustic 370 with the graphic equalizers on it. But it sounded great, and I used that amp a lot with Mungo Jerry, then with Chicken Shack with Stan Webb, and then with Widowmaker, and I had it for many years, and I'd use it on lots of stuff, even with Ozzy and that, you know. So that amp had a huge history, and they were great amps, those 360s and the 370s. I had the 370, but when I was first in London, I played through John Paul Jones's gear. Now, I played his jazz bass, and he had an old original slab body precision bass as well that I played, because I went to one of their rehearsals in London at the in Chalk Farm it was, and I had a play of John Paul Jones's basses through his 360 acoustic amp. So I love that stuff. It was really the only transistorized amp, you know, the solid state amps that I really liked. You know, the rest sounded a bit too clean or a bit, I don't know, they lack character, but the acoustics were great. When I was first staying in London at a friend of mine's flat, and he worked for Led Zeppelin, Clive Coulson, and I was only there a couple of days, and his doorbell rang, and it was John Paul Jones, and he came and he said, "Come out and have a look at my new car." He just bought a Bentley, a used Bentley, a few years old it was, but it was, I remember his words exactly. He said, "We're in the black now." He said it like that, "We're in the black now," meaning Led Zeppelin had gone out of debt, and I think they had 3 albums out at that point.
This is before he started getting into the boutique alembic basses. Did you ever play his 8-string?
I never ever liked them. I mean, it was obviously up to him what he played and what sound he wanted there, but I loved the early days that he got. I think it's a 61 slab board jazz bass that he had. Lovely sound on those early Zeppelin records. Beautiful. And that's through the acoustic 360 amp.
Yeah, I do love the tone on those early Zepp albums. Personally speaking, how do you keep your chops up? Do you have a practice schedule? And if so, what do you focus on when you're by yourself at home and picking up your bass?
Well, you have to practice from time to time, even if it's not every day. When I was learning, I made sure I practiced every day for a certain amount of time, whether it was half an hour, an hour, or whatever it was. But nowadays, if you're not doing anything, you still have to play and keep the cobwebs away and the rust out of things, you know. So what I usually do is just put on a favorite CD album and play along to it, and one that I'm sort of familiar with that just keeps the fingers limbered up. You know, it could be, a couple of old blues albums. There's a Freddie King album called Getting Ready, which is a great album, or a B.B. King or an Albert King, or sometimes I like Joe Walsh's stuff too. Sometimes I'll put a Joe Walsh album on and just play along to it if I'm familiar with the songs, and that keeps you limbered up.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I really do admire some of the latest work you've done. I mean, the Hoochie Coochie Men with John Lord. What an album. And
it's got a lot of good people on it.
Yeah, yes.
I enjoyed that one, but I love anything blues, you see.
Yeah. You played with some of the best drummers on the planet, and I'm sure it's hard to pick a favorite, but if you had to pick a favorite, who would it be? I mean, look, you got Cozy, Simon, Ansley, Eric Singer, Lee Kerslake, of course, which you have a great history with Lee, Bill Ward, and Carmine Peace, and of course Tony Williams. And I don't even think I got them all, but I think I got most of them. I know it's a hard question, but which is the one that comes to mind first? If you were like, "Hey, look, we're sending you to Mars, and you know,
you can take one drummer, yeah.
You have to take one drummer with you."
I suppose it's also how you get on with them as well. I mean, I got on great with all of them. You know, I remember when I worked with Tony Williams, he said he wanted to do a rock album along the lines of sort of Smashing Pumpkins kind of thing, and he asked me to play on it. But the following year he died, you know, because he had health problems. He was smoking, and his doctor told him to stop, and he didn't, and it stopped him. So, but he was a great player, Tony Williams. And, you know, Eric Singer was always a close mate, a good friend, great player, and I get on very well. But I get on great with Carmine, with Ainsley. Lee Kerslake was a real, like, sort of brother relationship with me for many years, you know. So to say one, I don't know, it's very difficult. It's a little bit like when somebody says, "You've played with all these great guitar players. Who's the best out of them all?" Well, there is no best. You know,
I know. It's hard.
Whoever's best for the time and for the situation and the band and the music. You know.
Yeah. So, I was really. I knew it was a hard question, but I had to pick your brain on it because you know, if it was up to me, my favorite rhythm section of yours probably would, I mean, I'm sorry, man. It has to be Cozy Powell for me. I mean, what a shame, because Lee, I love Lee so much, you know.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, but Cozy, man, oh my God, that period. Oh, I loved Cozy's
that
playing.
Was a great lineup with Rainbow, you know, with Ritchie Blackmore and Cozy and Ronnie and myself and David Stone. I enjoyed that a lot, immensely. You know, we were talking about doing a reunion. Just around the time, just before Cozy was killed, you know, because Cozy and I've been talking again, and we were talking, and he'd spoken to Ronnie, and Ronnie had spoken to Ritchie, and we all had green lights, and we were talking about reforming Rainbow to do an album and possibly touring with it. But then when Cozy was killed in his car, all that went out of the window, you know, so that was the end of that. But I enjoy them all. It'd be very difficult, and I wouldn't like to insult anybody by saying, no, I'd have him over him. you know what I mean? So
yeah, I know. Yeah. The period of, I guess, with you being on top of the world was really that Blizzard of Oz, Randy Rhoads period of your life. And I remember how what a big album, what a big moment in that period of my life, man. That was like, you know, the 80s, man. That was a great 79, 80, 81, 82.
Yeah, we formed that in 79, and we finally found Lee Kerslake right before recording, and that was beginning of 1980. And then the album came out. It came out in the UK in 1980, September 1980. And if you think about the musical climate at the time, it was punk and disco and the new wave thing, and bands like, you know, Sabbath, Uriah Heep were almost considered sort of like a bit dinosaurish by then. So we just went into the studio and did what we wanted to do and what we did best and what we enjoyed doing, and the enjoyment, I think, comes out in the music. So we didn't try to grasp the what was in vogue and try and recreate that, or do something that was going to be a hit or get airplay on the radio, or you know, what was in fashion at the time. We just did what we did, and that was it, like it or lump it, you know. So, but fortunately, people liked it. So,
well, you know, one of my favorite records of all time is Rainbow's "Long Live Rock and Roll," and I was I was on Wikipedia today because I wanted. Yeah. I read the book. I read your book. For fact's sake, it's an excellent book. But one thing I didn't remember in the book, or maybe I missed it, was the background of your playing on that album, because you're only credited for playing "Kill the King" and the epic Gates of Babylon.
Gates of Babylon, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I loved your bass work on that song by itself. And I was wondering to myself, so I'm looking at the credits and I see Ritchie getting credit for like The Shed and Lady of the Lake and all that. And I'm like,
yes,
why didn't you get included in those songs?
Because they'd already been done when I came in. They did have a bass player called Mark Clark, who was starting to record stuff, but then Ritchie went off him, and then he was gone. And then Ritchie recorded some bass tracks himself because they didn't have anybody. So when I came in, instead of getting me to redo what Ritchie had done, they just got me to do the tracks that hadn't been done, which was Kill the King and Gates of Babylon. They were sensitive to light as well. But I think Ritchie ended up playing on that one as well. But Ritchie was a sort of adequate bass player. I mean, he wasn't really a bass player as such. You know, he didn't play like a bass player sort of thing. You know, he played the notes and he played the parts, you know, in time and in tune and correctly and all that. But I just thought it lacked character as a bass player sort of thing. You know,
absolutely. And being a fan of yours, I always question to myself, like the next album, which was Rainbow Rising, and that album is such a top 10 favorite heavy metal hard rock album of all of us. And I was like, man, I wish Bob was on that. But hey, you know that. So it's interesting. We're talking about guitarists right now. You know, they're kind of a different animal to tame. I mean, they're alpha males, and you know, like Ritchie and Yngve, man. And, you know, but yet your relationship with Randy Rhoads and how you speak of him was really heartfelt and poignant. And I mean, you still own this Holy Grail, which is this 8 hours of unreleased tapes, right? Of the Blizzard of Oz sessions, right?
Yeah.
And my question to you about this, and I'm sure you've heard this many times, I'm going to ask it anyway. Are there any plans to release them, or even for you to be part of maybe a motion picture deal of Randy's life, a buy-up? Because you would be a great person, and you know, Randy's family, of course, but you would be a great person to tell the tale, you know?
Well, I recorded all our rehearsals and writing sessions, not for posterity, and not for any other reason other than, you know, so we could remember what we did the next day. You know, if you're writing something and you come up with new parts and then you change things and then you try something else, and by the next day you might get, you know, the famous last words of, oh yeah, we'll remember that tomorrow. But, you know, I never ever wanted to take any chances, so I recorded what we did. So it was on, if anybody had forgotten the parts or whatever, I had them, you know. So that was the main reason that I recorded everything. And I still have those, and they're very interesting to listen to. Some of the songs changed by the time we recorded them, so people would hear changes in the original versions. You know, if I'd had my way, those tapes would have been released years ago. But there's so much sort of legal complications in releasing other people's performances and with their name and likeness and all the rest of it. But, you know, I've offered them up in the past as for like bonus material to be released with, you know, remastered or stuff with bonus material on it already. But I've never been taken up on it. So they're sitting here. I've had them all transferred to discs. So the tapes, just in case they deteriorated in quality, you know, because as tapes can over years. But so I've got them all on disc. But I'd love to be able to get those released. You know, it's not a money thing, and it's just a legal thing that, you know, I can't do it by myself. So that's why no one's heard them.
Has anybody approached you on a buy-up of Randy? I mean, you've got all these documentary players out there, these cinematographers that would probably jump at the moment of telling his story.
Yes, several years ago there was going to be a movie made about Randy, and you know, I offered up that stuff, but that story's in my book. You may remember it.
I do remember it. Well, I'm going to name some of my favorite Bob Daisley recordings, and can you put them in order from favorites to least favorites? Okay. Let's see what you think. So I've got Rainbow Live in Munich. I wanted to choose, of course, Long Live Rock and Roll, but you didn't play bass on the whole album, so I don't think it would have been fair. So Rainbow Live in Munich, and then, of course, Ozzy. I chose Ozzy, Diary of a Madman. Then Uriah Heep. How do you pronounce that? Abominog. Yeah. Abominog. Then Ozzy's Bark at the Moon, which was a great album with Jakey Lee. Yngve Malmsten's Odyssey. Gary Moore, Still Got the Blues. And the last one would have to be the Hoochie Coochie Men with John Lord, the live CD DVD set. So how would you put these in order?
Well, they're different periods and certainly different artists with very different sort of musical genres. I mean, how would you compare? Yngve's album was a little bit sort of radio-friendly commercial rock, which is not a bad thing. It's still a good thing. But I'd probably, as a first, I'd probably put I don't know, Diary of a Madman first, maybe, because we put our hearts and souls into that album, and it was you can hear it in it. I put a lot of work into that, and for the second one, I'd probably put Abominog, Uriah Heep, because there's a story attached to that. When we brought that album out, it was released in America through what was in England and Europe was Bronze Records, which was Jerry Bron, who'd been the record company with Uriah Heep previously. And when that album was released in America, David Geffen, who was that was a huge name, huge record company, Geffen Records. They just had a great big hit with John Lennon's Double Fantasy, but they had a lot of big artists and a lot of big, very successful albums. And David Geffen got in touch with Jerry Bron, and he said, "I'd like to release this Uriah Heep album, Abominog." He said, "Will you give it to me for America?" Because he loved the album, David Geffen. And Jerry Bron said, "Well, yeah, you can have Uriah Heep if you take Girls' School and Motorhead." And David Geffen said, "No, I don't want them." He said, "I just want Uriah Heep." So Jerry Bron said, "No deal then." So we lost out on that. So I think that album could have been huge, certainly way bigger than gotten a lot more recognition than it did get. And I didn't find that out until years later, so I asked Mickey Box about it. I said, "Is that story true?" Just quite recently, a year or two ago. And he said, "Yep, it's true. That's what happened." And that was very disappointing. So, so what have we got? Ozzy, Diary of a Madman, Uriah Heep, Abominog.
Where does the Hoochie Coochie Men fall into place on this list?
I'll probably coming up next, because I love anything blues or blues orientated or blues influenced, because that's always been one of my favorite genres. As I remember as a kid, when I was sort of 14, 15, and I was listening to Rolling the Stones records, the original lineup with Brian Jones, when they were still quite strictly blues and rhythm and blues, and that I just loved that stuff. And it was like a white band promoting black roots music. They were sort of crusaders, because young white kids, whether it was here or in America or wherever it was, weren't familiar with Howlin' Wolf and Sonny Boy Williamson and Willie Dixon and all the blues greats. And the Stones were sort of introducing them to young white kids, and that's why I think that's a big reason they took off like they did, because people hadn't really heard or weren't that familiar with that blues, and they played it quite authentically, So, and that was a big influence of Brian Jones, who got pushed out of his own band, but that's another story. Yeah. So after that, I don't know. The Gary Moore album still got the blues for you. I only played on about 3 or 4 tracks on that, but fortunately one of them was with George Harrison. So to me, that was a big deal to play with a Beatle,
Yes, absolutely.
It was Brian Downey on drums, the drummer of Thin Lizzy, and obviously Gary Moore. and me and George Harrison, and that meant a lot to me to be on a track with the Beatles. So that was wonderful stuff. I'd probably put Bark at the Moon next because I thought that was a very good album. Nobody knew what it was going to do at the time because the original band had ceased. Randy had died and Lee had gone, and Ozzy and I were the only two original members of the Blizzard of Oz. So. But Jakey Lee did an admirable job, I thought, of filling in the stepping into the guitar player's shoes. I have nothing but praise for Jake as a player. Brilliant stuff, Jake and I used to sit on chairs opposite each other and work out parts and put the songs together, and then Ozzy would sing vocal melodies. His melodies were always good. I liked his melodies, and I used to write lyrics to his melodies. So. That was they were fun times, but it was, for all we knew at the time that, we didn't know if that album was going to take off or get, acknowledged or recognition or have any success at all. But it did obviously do well. But
great stuff, man. I wanted to tell you that I remember, I have a memory back in 80, I think it was 84, 85.
Yeah.
I used to drive a taxi in New York City, and I had a big boom box on the front seat with me.
Yeah.
I used to make my own mixtapes, and I remember, I think I picked up a famous guy. His name is Dan Rather, CBS News here in America.
Oh, right.
And,
okay, I remember.
And I was blasting "Waiting for Darkness," man, and he actually enjoyed it. He was like, "What are you listening to?" I said, "Oh man, this is Ozzy Osbourne or something like that." And he was like, "This sounds pretty good." I said, "Yeah, doesn't it, man? Check out the guitar. That hook, man, on Waiting for Darkness was so catchy, man. So I have I have a memory of that. That's funny. One thing that can be said about you, Bob, is you are a deeply spiritual person. Your experiences with Hinduism and how chanting has helped you maintain this calm and focus throughout the craziness of the music business, right? And I actually wanted to quote you on two things out of the book that I remember that stuck with me. One was, it's easy for any of us to become lost in our importance.
Yes.
That hit me like a ton of bricks because as an artist, you're always me, right? You're always thinking, I got these goals, I got this, I've got to get this done. I want to know how people react to this and how is my new album doing? How's my new single doing? All of that stuff. So, that really stayed with me. And another thing that you said, which I thought was very cool, was you said, I don't think anyone can afford to sit back and wait for things to happen. We are still accountable for our actions, words, and thoughts. And that blew my mind, man. I mean, I wish my dad would have told me that back when I was 18 years old or something, but those are very prolific words. And so I have a question for you. What advice would you give to young musicians out there just getting into this business, just starting with their dreams and playing in bands and going through the whole thing that we've gone through? Do you have any personal advice you can give them?
Well, whatever genre takes your fancy, go into it, find out who's behind it, who's influenced it, what their influences were, and it's okay to try to sound like someone else. Base yourself on whoever is your hero, and try to sound like them, because eventually you come through. You might try to sound like whoever it is, whether it's Paul McCartney or James Jamerson or whatever, great Willie Weeks, some great bass players around. As far as bass, I'm just talking in general bass terms, but whatever instrument you play, base yourself on someone else. Get your influences and you start shining through anyway. But you have to be in this business. You got to be reliable. You got to have a reputation of being reliable as well. And you have to stay professional. Whether you have actually gone professional as a player or not, you got to have that professional attitude of music comes first and reliability along with it. And you got to have something to back it up with, and that's practice. And, it's great to sit and play along with records. I mean, I used to wear my sister's records out, by sitting there and playing along with them, trying to learn parts and that, so, but yeah, the one thing that we all have to remember is that we're playing music for other people. It's not obviously it's our self-expression, and it's great to be able to express yourself with music, and it's got to come from the heart. And with music coming from the heart with that emotion, people usually relate to that better than somebody just trying to impress by being a virtuoso, or look how many notes I can play, or look how fast I can play, or look how slick I am as a drummer or whatever. But if it doesn't come from the heart, it doesn't mean shit. And if you don't make people emote, emotion is the main object of the exercise. Music is for making people emote, whether it's sadness, happiness, love, passion, whatever. But it's got to make people emote. And I think they're important ingredients as far as being a musician goes.
That is some really, really profound and great advice, Bob. I definitely want to thank you for spending your time. I mean, I always wanted to know what it would be like to talk to somebody in the future, man. So I was going to ask you, hey, how is it over there a day ahead of me? But any news on Afghanistan, man? I mean, it's like,
So you're all right for Wednesday, but I think we'll have to see for tomorrow.
So look, I'm gonna let you go. I definitely thank you for spending your time with me. There's just a couple little things I'm going to ask you just to talk about.
Sure.
I also want to just talk to you very quickly about your bass collection, and one of my favorite things about your bass collection is the 1956 Gibson violin EB1, which I've been looking for on eBay, and I found two, but I didn't, and they're varied in price. One is $4,000, the other one is, I think, $12,000 or something. They're pretty expensive.
Right. The one I had was Little Richard's bass player, Ozzy Osbourne, and he played the early Little Richard hits with that bass. But unfortunately, I was persuaded to put it into an auction and sell it, and I did that last year. And
wow.
I know, yeah. And that was Ozzy Robinson's bass that he played on the early Little Richard hits with, and that one's gone.
Oh, Bob, I hope you got a lot of money for it, man.
Not fortune. No, that's how I was sort of persuaded. Oh, put it in the auction. We're having a Little Richard auction, and that's going to go really well, and you'll get this, or you get at least that, and it didn't go that well.
What a shame. That out of all your basses, you've got some great basses, and I
still have a wonderful collection. I've got some great stuff. Vintage stuff. I've got Ronnie Lane's bass that I used with the Faces with Rod Stewart in the early days, and that's a one-off. There's only one of those. So that's a good one.
You got a Framus Star bass, and I don't know if you're
like Bill Wyman's. Yeah.
And now, if you're familiar, I don't know if you get the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon in Australia.
I've seen it.
Yeah, the bass player, I don't know his name, but the bass player, like this guy has a $10,000 bass, a Federa bass that he plays. But if you watch the show Night to Night, he always goes to this Framus that he plays. It looks like a short scale Framus.
Wow.
It looks like it's round strings that he play. I mean, not round, flat rounds that he plays. Yeah. But and very cool bass. I've been looking for that bass for a long time, to be honest with you.
It took me years and years and years of searching before I came up with that. It's called the Humbug finish because it's striped. It's like the one that Bill Wyman. It's actually purported to have been one of Bill Wyman's, but I didn't get any paperwork with it. So whether it was or not, but I just bought it for what it was and not whose it was.
Another bass of yours that stood out for me
Yeah.
is the Guild B301 Fretless.
Yeah, I use that on. I've used it on a couple of things actually, but I don't have that. That one's in the Hard Rock Cafe in somewhere. So I think it's somewhere in America. There's a picture of it in my book with Don Airy sitting on it. It's up on the wall. Yeah. That was a nice little bass. That. Yeah.
I had a wonderful time chatting with you. I really appreciate you spending your time with me. I hope that this interview was as rewarding to you as it was for me. And
it was enjoyable. Nice talking to you, mate. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really, really cool, man. I really appreciate your time. And I'll send you a link to when it's posted.
Please do. I'll put it up on the site and I'll get it circulated.
All right. That'll be great, Bob. I appreciate it.
Okay, mate.
All right. You take care, man. We'll talk soon, okay?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, stay in touch.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, mate. All the best. Cheers. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this educational music program, please subscribe to We Sing the Bass Electric on your favorite podcast platform. We would love your feedback. Email us at WeSingTheBassElectric@gmail.com. For bonus material and a chance to win merchandise, such as autographed CDs and more, subscribe to our YouTube channel and join our mailing list at WeSingTheBassElectric.com. As always, thank you for your support. And please buy music from these spotlighted artists. It makes a difference.